My name's Emily Carter. I'm 29, a single mom to a 5-year-old little girl with the brightest eyes you've ever seen. Most nights, I'm wiping down counters and mopping floors in the county hospital while my mom watches my daughter back home. It's not the life I dreamed of, but it's honest work, and I'm good at staying invisible. That night, the rain was pounding so hard on the roof, it felt like the whole place was breathing. The night shift was quiet, quieter than usual. The nurses were short-staffed, and Dr. Lewis, the only surgeon on call, had been running from room to room all evening. I had just finished the pediatric wing and was heading toward the west hallway. My sneakers squeaked on the wet linoleum. That's when I saw him. A young soldier, maybe 22, pale as the sheets beneath him. He was alone in his room, an IV dripping slowly. His breathing was shallow. Then the intercom crackled to life. A nurse's panicked voice broke through the static code blue. "Dr. Lewis is down, repeat, doctor, down. We need assistance in ER now." My heart skipped. I peeked back into the soldier's room. His monitor was screaming a high-pitched sound I'll never forget. There was no one else in the hallway. No doctor. No nurse. Just me, a cleaner with zero medical training. I froze, gripping my spray bottle so tight my knuckles turned white. But in that moment, something inside me whispered, "If you don't step in, he's not going to make it." I told myself I was just here to mop floors. But that night, I had to decide if I would keep my head down or do something that could cost me everything. The sound of sirens shattered the stillness. Through the foggy glass doors at the end of the hallway, I saw flashing red lights cut through the rain. An ambulance screeched to a halt outside. 2 medics leapt out their boots, splashing through puddles as they wheeled in a gurney. Lying on it was a young man in army fatigues. His face was smeared with mud and blood. One of his legs was bandaged hastily, soaked through with crimson. My stomach tightened. From my corner by the janitor's closet, I watched as they rushed him past. His dog tags clinked softly against his chest. Gunshot wound to the thigh. Arterial bleed. BP's dropping fast, one medic barked. Dr. Lewis came running. He'd been on shift for 16 hours straight. I could see the exhaustion in his eyes even from here. "Get him to OR 2 now," the doctor ordered. His voice was steady, but his hands trembled as he pulled on gloves. But then he staggered. Clutching his chest, Dr. Lewis leaned against the wall. His face contorted in pain. "Doctor," a nurse shouted. He waved her off. I'm fine. Just need a second." But he wasn't fine. Not even close. I stood frozen, gripping the mop handle like it could anchor me to the floor. The soldier groaned on the gurney as they wheeled him toward the operating room. The bleeding was bad. Too bad. And the only surgeon in the hospital was about to collapse. A nurse whispered frantically into her radio, calling for backup. But in a small-town hospital like this, there wasn't any backup. The nearest surgeon was over an hour away. They can't wait an hour, I thought. I wasn't supposed to be there. I wasn't supposed to even see things like this. But I couldn't tear my eyes away. The soldier's hand slipped off the edge of the gurney as they pushed him past me. His fingertips brushed my arm for just a moment, cold, lifeless. And something in me broke. I didn't know his name. I didn't know why he'd been shot or what battles he'd fought. But in that instant, he wasn't just a stranger. He was someone's son. And if no one did something soon, he was going to die. Dr. Lewis stumbled again. This time, he didn't catch himself. His knees buckled and he crashed to the floor, his stethoscope clattering across the tiles. "Doctor," the nurse screamed. She dropped the medical chart in her hands and ran to him kneeling beside his crumpled body. I stood there frozen, my knuckles white around the mop handle. The soldier on the gurney let out a low, guttural groan. His bandage was soaked through blood, dripping onto the floor in thick, dark drops. The nurse's voice was sharp with panic now. Call for help. Someone call for help. But no one came. It was midnight. The storm outside had cut power lines across half the county. Staff were already stretched thin. Most had gone home hours ago. She fumbled for her radio. We need a surgeon code blue in OR 2. Dr. Lewis is down, Static answered her. I looked around the hallway. The fluorescent lights flickered weakly shadows, stretching long and strange on the walls. No footsteps. No voices. The only sounds were the rain hammering the roof and the soldier's ragged breathing. The nurse's face was pale. She shook Dr. Lewis's shoulder desperately. "Doctor, stay with me, please." But his lips were blue. His eyes fluttered shut. The nurse looked up at me. Our eyes met for a split second. "Can you help me lift him?" she asked, her voice breaking. I hesitated. My mind screamed no. I wasn't trained for this. I was just here to clean floors, to keep my head down, to get through another long night in this quiet hospital. But my body moved before I could think. I set the mop aside and rushed to her side. We lifted Dr. Lewis carefully onto a stretcher and wheeled him to the adjacent room. The nurse turned back to the soldier. She looked at the gurney, the bloody bandages, the monitor's blaring warning tones. Her hands trembled. "There's no time," she whispered. She spun around and grabbed my arm. You have to stay with him. Don't let him fall unconscious. Keep talking to him." "Me," I stammered. "Yes. Keep him awake. Apply pressure here." She shoved my hand over the bandage, and I felt the hot rush of blood soaking through. "But I don't." "You have to," she snapped. Then she disappeared into the other room to try and revive Dr. Lewis, and I was left alone in the dim light, with a dying soldier, my hands pressed against his wound, my heart pounding so loud I could barely hear anything else. The nurse's voice cracked as she grabbed my sleeve. "Do you know anything? He's going to die if we don't do something." I froze. The fluorescent lights hummed above, making the silence in the hallway feel louder. My hands, still smelling faintly of bleach and ammonia, trembled. I'm just the janitor," I stammered. But then I saw the soldier's chest rising shallowly on the gurney. Blood pooled around his uniform, dripping onto the tile I had mopped minutes ago. His lips were pale, almost blue. The doctor wasn't coming back. He lay unconscious in the next room. The nurse's frantic calls to other staff went unanswered. The storm outside had taken out the roads. We were alone, and I heard my father's voice in my head, as clear as the night he told me, before he passed. "If nobody steps up, you must. Sometimes life doesn't wait for the right person. It just needs someone willing." I clenched my fists, feeling the weight of those words. I took a first aid course years ago," I said, surprising even myself. The nurse's eyes lit up with a mix of desperation and hope. Then, "You're all we've got." I looked down at the soldier. He couldn't be more than 23. His dog tags glinted under the harsh lights. He whispered something, maybe a name, before slipping back into unconsciousness. The mop handle was still in my grip. I set it down gently, almost ceremoniously, like I was shedding the skin of the woman I had been until this moment. "Okay," I exhaled. "Tell me what you need me to do." The nurse didn't hesitate. We have to stop the bleeding first. I'll talk you through it, but your hands will have to work. My hands, the same hands that had scrubbed floors for years, that had never held anything more fragile than a broken glass. Could they save a life? There was no time to doubt. "Show me," I said. And as I followed her into the ER, I felt something shift deep inside me. Maybe for the first time in my life, I wasn't just the janitor anymore. I pressed my palms against the soldier's chest, trying to focus on the rise and fall, faint and irregular. Pressure. Keep the pressure steady. The nurse barked, her voice cracking under strain. Blood oozed between my fingers, warm and sticky. My stomach churned, but I forced myself not to flinch. "I can't lose him," she whispered almost to herself. "We can't." Her eyes darted to me, searching for anything that would make sense of this impossible situation. I swallowed hard. The truth clawed its way out of my throat. I went to med school once." The nurse froze. "What I studied for 2 years. But I dropped out. Why?" I shook my head. "It doesn't matter now." She gripped my arm tight, her nails digging in slightly. Her face was wet with sweat and tears. "Then you know more than me. More than anyone here. Emily, please. Try." Her words hit me like a punch. Try. Try, even though I wasn't a doctor. Even though my mind screamed at me that I wasn't good enough. The soldier let out a low groan, his body jerking. The monitor beeped erratically, then flatlined for a second before returning to a weak rhythm. There was no time. "I'm scared," I admitted, my voice trembling. "So am I," the nurse said softly, "but fear won't save him. You might." I looked at the soldier's face, so young, so vulnerable. He could have been my brother. I remembered the day I left medical school, my professor's disappointed gaze, and my mother's tearful words. "You're throwing away your gift." But maybe, just maybe, tonight was my chance to make it right. I took a deep breath and nodded. "Okay," I said, my chest tightening. "Tell me what's next." The nurse exhaled sharply, relief flooding her features. "Good. I'll assist you every step. We need to open the wound and stop the internal bleeding." My heart pounded like a drum in my ears. My fingers hovered over the soldier's uniform, about to cross a line I swore I'd never cross again. This wasn't supposed to be my life anymore, but life didn't care what I was supposed to be. I turned to the sink, twisting the faucet with trembling hands. Water gushed out warm at first, then icy cold. I scrubbed furiously, watching the blood swirl down the drain. For a moment, it wasn't the soldier's blood I saw, but a smaller, paler hand slipping from my grasp. That day, the operating room had been so bright, so unforgiving. I was only a student, but they let me assist. A 7-year-old boy on the table, his chest rising shallowly under the surgical lights. The lead surgeon barked orders, and my hands fumbled. "Clamp now." But I was too slow. The bleeding didn't stop. The heart monitor let out that terrible, flat scream. We lost him. His mother's wail pierced the sterile walls. I stood there, frozen hands still slick with her son's blood. It was the last time I set foot in a hospital as a medical student. "You're not meant for this," I told myself that day. "You'll only hurt people." Now, years later, the same dread gripped me. "Emily." The nurse's sharp voice snapped me back. The soldier's chest rose weakly. The monitor beeped slower and slower. "We're losing him," she whispered. I glanced at my reflection in the stainless steel panel above the sink. My face was pale, eyes wide, like a trapped animal. If you mess up again, it'll be your fault. But if I didn't try, he would die anyway. My father's words echoed in my mind. If no one else will do it, then you must. I shut off the water, my hands still dripping. Scalpel, I said hoarsely. The nurse handed it to me without hesitation. My fingers tightened around the handle. The soldier groaned softly. His eyelids fluttered. "You're going to be okay?" I murmured, not sure if I was talking to him or to myself. The scalpel felt heavier than I remembered. Its cold steel blade caught the dim light as I hovered above his chest. My hands shook so violently I thought I'd drop it. "Emily," the nurse whispered, her voice almost lost in the oppressive silence. I could hear everything. The rain lashing the windows, my own heart pounding in my ears, and most terrifying of all, the soldier's heart monitor beeping slower, weaker. Beep. Pause. Beep. Each sound was like a needle piercing my skull. The soldier lay still, his face pale beneath the fluorescent lights. He couldn't be more than 20. Barely a man, really. He doesn't deserve to die like this. But my mind screamed back. What if you kill him? What if you fail again? I clenched the scalpel tighter, my knuckles white. "Blood pressure's dropping," the nurse said sharply. "We're running out of time." I looked down at the gash across his abdomen. Dark blood oozed steadily, soaking the sheets. I wanted to run, to throw the scalpel away, and hide in the janitor's closet until this was over. But then I saw his dog tags resting against his collarbone stained red. The name etched into the metal caught my eye. Carter. He had a name, a family, someone waiting for him to come home. "This is your second chance," I told myself. "Don't waste it." I drew in a ragged breath and pressed the blade gently to his skin. My hands steadied not completely, but enough. "I'm going in," I said, my voice low but firm. The nurse nodded, eyes locked on mine. "You can do this." As I made the first incision, blood welled up hot and slick against my gloves. I swallowed the bile rising in my throat. "Clamp," I muttered. The nurse handed it to me instantly. The beeping slowed again. Beep. Beep. "Faster," Emily, the nurse urged. I leaned in closer, my mind going blank, except for the steps drilled into me years ago. Cut. Clamp. Suture. Breathe. For the first time in years, I wasn't a janitor anymore. I was a surgeon. The smell of antiseptic brought it all flooding back. 25 years ago, I was standing in a room much like this one, the lights glaring overhead, the sound of monitors beeping in uneven rhythm, and a pair of wide, frightened eyes staring up at me from the operating table. Her name was Lily. She was 6. I had been so confident that night. I'd graduated at the top of my class, praised as the most promising young surgeon in my program. The attending had entrusted me with a delicate pediatric procedure while he supervised from the gallery. "This is your moment, Dr. Miller," he'd said, with a reassuring smile. But it wasn't my moment. Halfway through the procedure, her tiny heart faltered. "Stay calm," the attending instructed, but my hands betrayed me. They trembled, fumbled with the instruments. I miscalculated a clamp placement. A rush of blood pooled where it shouldn't. "Pressure's dropping," a nurse shouted. I tried to correct my mistake, but panic clouded my mind. My vision tunneled as alarms shrieked. The last thing I remember was the flatline sound echoing like a gunshot. Beep. They called the time of death at 2:17 a.m. The parents' screams still haunt me. Her mother collapsed to the floor outside the OR doors, her sobs ragged raw. I didn't have the courage to face her. I never went back. I resigned the next morning and vanished from the medical field entirely. The guilt was too heavy to carry into another surgery. And now, here I was, hands-gloved scalpel in hand, hovering over another fragile life. What if I failed again, Emily? The nurse's voice snapped me back to the present. Carter's heart rate dipped lower on the monitor. "You're the only one who can save him," she said, her eyes glassy with fear. "I'm not a surgeon anymore," I wanted to say. But Lily's face wouldn't leave my mind. I can't let this boy's mother feel that same agony. "Clamp," I said, my voice steadier this time. I could barely hear over the pounding in my ears. The scalpel felt like it weighed 100 pounds in my trembling hand. Carter's blood kept welling up from the gash in his abdomen, warm and slick against my gloves. "Clamp," I said sharply. The nurse handed it over without a word, her breathing shallow. I worked by instinct. Locate the tear. Stop the bleeding. Don't think about Lily. A spurt of dark blood erupted as I adjusted the tissue. Pressure dropping, the nurse cried. The heart monitor's steady beep slowed, then faltered. Beep, beep, beep. Then nothing. A flat tone filled the room. "No, no, no, no." My voice cracked as the sound drilled into my skull. I froze for half a second, staring at the monitor. The line was flat. My chest clenched so tightly it felt like my ribs might snap. This can't happen again. Not again. In my mind, I saw Lily's tiny body lying motionless, her mother's screams tearing through the corridor. Not this boy, too. Not tonight. "Start compressions," the nurse said, her voice breaking. But I slammed my hands on Carter's chest before she could move. "I've got it," I barked. Rhythmically, I pushed down with all my strength, counting under my breath. 1, 2, 3. "You're not dying on me." "Come on, fight," I shouted. The nurse pressed a bag valve mask over Carter's face, pumping air into his lungs. "Adrenaline," I said. She fumbled for a syringe, her hands slick with sweat, and injected it into his IV. Again I growled, still compressing. My shoulders screamed in pain, but I didn't stop. I let one life slip through my fingers. Never again. "You hear me, kid? You're not going anywhere." I leaned closer, almost whispering. "I won't let you die. I can't let you die." The monitor flickered. A faint blip. Then another. "Heart rhythm returning," the nurse exclaimed. I didn't stop compressions. "Come on, Carter. Stay with me." The blips grew stronger, faster, until the machine beeped in steady rhythm again. I collapsed back on my heels, gasping for air. My arms hung heavy at my sides. The nurse's face crumpled with relief. You did it," she whispered. But I didn't feel relief yet. I wasn't done. The bleeding still hadn't stopped. If I didn't seal the artery now, all this would be for nothing. I grabbed the suture needle, forcing my trembling fingers to steady. "Scissors," I said. My voice was steel. This time I wouldn't fail. I pressed down hard, my palms slipping slightly on his chest despite the gloves. "Stay with me," I whispered through gritted teeth. The sound of the flatline still echoed in my ears. It felt like the whole room was holding its breath, waiting to see if I'd succeed. Or fail again. My arms burned shoulders tight as iron cables. Sweat trickled down my temples, blurring my vision. 1, 2, 3. I counted out loud, forcing myself into a rhythm. The nurse wiped at her forehead with the back of her sleeve, her wide eyes darting between me and the monitor. The boy's skin was pale and clammy. "Adrenaline in?" I asked. "Yes." "Nothing yet," she said, voice quivering. I pushed harder, leaning into each compression as my own heart pounded wildly out of control. "This isn't how it ends," I muttered. "Not for him. Not this time." A sharp pain shot through my chest, panic clawing its way up my throat. You failed before. You'll fail again. He's already gone. No, I shouted, silencing the voice in my head. I kept going. Press release. Press release. Then, a blip. My hands froze for a fraction of a second. Again the nurse cried. Don't stop. I forced myself to keep moving. Blip. Blip. The monitor chirped faintly, as though hesitant to trust the faint rhythm. Come on, I whispered. Come back to me. The blip steadied. Weak, but there. Heart rate returning, the nurse said, her voice trembling. A breath I hadn't realized I was holding escaped my lips in a shaky rush. I stared at the boy's face so young, his lashes clumped together with sweat and blood. You're not leaving us tonight, soldier, I said softly. The nurse exhaled, her shoulders sagging. But there was no time to celebrate. The bleeding hadn't stopped. Scalpel, I said. My voice was steadier now. I could still lose him if I didn't move fast. As I reached for the forceps, my hands faltered for the briefest moment. The room around me seemed to blur the sterile light, replaced by the dim glow of a hospital room from long ago. A small voice whispered in my ear, Are you going to run again, doctor? I froze. I could almost see him, Joshua, no older than 8, his frail little frame wrapped in a hospital gown, too big for his tiny shoulders. The same boy from that night 25 years ago, the night that ruined me. You promised you'd save me, he said softly. His dark eyes shimmered not with accusation, but with the innocent confusion of a child who didn't understand why help never came. I tried to shake the vision away. This isn't real, I murmured under my breath. But it felt real. The smell of antiseptic. The faint sound of his mother sobbing in the hallway. My own voice back then trembling as I told the attending surgeon I couldn't handle it, that I wasn't ready. And then Joshua's heart stopped while I stood outside the OR, paralyzed by fear. My chest tightened. My pulse roared in my ears. The soldier on the table groaned faintly, blood still pooling under him. If you run again, he'll die too. Joshua's voice echoed in my head. No, I said aloud this time, startling the nurse. Doctor, she asked. I blinked, forcing myself back into the present. I'm not running, I said firmly, more to myself than to her. I took a deep breath, my gloved fingers gripping the forceps tighter. This is different. I am different. The soldier's monitor gave a weak but steady beep. The nurse handed me a suture needle. You can do this. We don't have anyone else. I nodded. For a moment the boy's face flickered in my mind again. But this time he smiled. Go on then, he whispered. Don't let him down. I exhaled slowly and leaned in. Okay, I said under my breath. Let's save his life. The room fell silent except for the sound of my own breathing, shallow, uneven. I pressed the final stitch, closed, my fingers stiff and trembling. Sweat streamed down my temples, soaking the collar of my scrubs. Come on. Come on, I whispered to the soldier on the table, as though willing his body to respond. The monitor beside us gave a long, flat tone. For half a second, my heart stopped. No, not again. Not this time. I dropped the needle and placed both hands on his chest, beginning compressions. The nurse counted out loud beside me, her voice high and tight with fear. 1, 2, 3, 4. My arms ached. My palms were slick inside the gloves. I ignored it. Breathe, I growled. You're not leaving here. Not tonight. The soldier's face was pale, blood still smeared across his jawline. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. 20 seconds. I pressed harder. Hard enough that I thought I might break his ribs. Doctor, the nurse began, her voice cracking. Again I barked, and then beep. The sound was faint. Beep, beep. The line on the screen fluttered and then steadied into a slow, fragile rhythm. Hearts can be stubborn things. I froze, staring at the monitor in disbelief. "He's back," the nurse whispered, covering her mouth with a gloved hand. My shoulders sagged as the weight of the moment hit me. I felt my knees buckle, and I grabbed the edge of the table to stay upright. He was alive. I tore off my gloves and staggered back. My vision blurred, not from exhaustion, but from the tears I'd been holding back since I picked up the scalpel. This time, I hadn't run. This time I'd stayed, and someone had lived because of it. The nurse placed a hand on my arm. "You saved him," she said softly. I shook my head. "We saved him." But deep down I knew this wasn't just about the soldier. It was about the boy from all those years ago. Maybe this was my chance to make peace with him too. The soldier stirred slightly on the table, his lips parting as if to speak. "Rest," I murmured. "You made it through." Outside, the rain had stopped, and for the first time in years, so had the storm inside me. My hands moved on instinct, now clamp, snip, suture, over and over again. The bleeding had slowed, but each cut, each stitch felt like it was piercing straight through me. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. It wasn't just adrenaline anymore. It was fear and guilt. This boy lying on the table, he didn't know me. He didn't know my past, or the mistake that still haunted me like a shadow. But I knew. And every time the needle pulled tight, I saw her face the little girl from years ago, her chest rising and falling slower and slower until... Nothing. "You're not a surgeon anymore," I told myself. "You shouldn't even be here." The voice in my head was sharp, accusatory, but there was another voice, too, softer, quieter. If not you, then who? I forced the memory away and focused on the artery in front of me. It was thin, delicate. One wrong move, and everything I'd done up to this point would be for nothing. The nurse leaned closer, her voice breaking the heavy silence. "You're doing great," she said, though her eyes were rimmed with tears. "He's still with us." I gave her the smallest nod I could manage. "Pass me the suture," I whispered. Her gloved hand trembled as she placed the thread into mine. "Stay steady," I told myself. "No mistakes." But my chest felt tight, as if someone were pressing down on it. This wasn't just about saving him anymore. It was about proving to myself that I could do it, that I wasn't the failure I'd believed I was for so long. I drew in a shaky breath and made the final knot. Then I leaned back slightly, staring at the wound I'd closed. It wasn't pretty, but it held. The monitor continued its soft, reassuring beeps, and for the first time in hours, I let myself believe he might make it. But deep down, I knew the hardest part wasn't over yet. "Hold it steady," I said, my voice barely louder than a whisper. The nurse nodded, her hands trembling as she adjusted the tube. I could see the fear in her eyes, but there was something else, too, determination. Together, we secured the airway, making sure oxygen could flow freely again. The soldier's chest rose and fell unevenly, but it was movement. That was enough. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "Focus," I told myself, one step at a time. But as my hands moved automatically, part of me felt detached, like I was watching from above. Every movement I made felt too symbolic, too heavy. When I tightened the strap to hold the tube in place, it wasn't just his breathing I was trying to save. It felt like I was trying to resuscitate a part of myself long dead. "This isn't about you," the logical side of my brain snapped. This is about him. But my chest burned with memories anyway. That night, 25 years ago, when I lost her, the way my hands had slipped the blood that wouldn't stop the sound of the heart monitor flatlining those images still came to me in dreams. After that, I walked away. I'd told myself it was for the best, that medicine wasn't for people like me. But now, here I was, scalpel in one hand, guilt in the other, trying to keep a stranger alive. Airway secured, the nurse said, pulling me back to the present. Good, I murmured, swallowing hard. I glanced at the boy's face. Young, pale, too young to be staring at death this way. And in a flash I saw her again. The little girl, the one I couldn't save. Her voice whispered in my head. "You're not going to run again, are you?" I shook my head. Not at the nurse, not at the soldier, but at the ghost haunting me. "No," I whispered under my breath. "Not this time," Doctor the nurse asked softly. I blinked. For a second, I'd forgotten where I was. "Nothing," I said quickly. "Suction, please." She handed me the device, and as I cleared the blood from the wound, I felt something shift inside me like a cracked door slowly opening. Maybe this wasn't just about saving his life. Maybe it was about saving mine too. The bleeding slowed. I stared at the wound, my hands moving on instinct now. One last suture. One more careful knot. And then, stillness. The monitor beeped steady, strong, the kind of sound that makes your chest ache because you've been holding your breath too long. I let the needle drop into the tray and pulled off my gloves with a snap. "It's over," I whispered. The nurse beside me, her face streaked with sweat, and tears let out a sob and pressed her hands to her mouth. "You did it," she choked out. You saved him." I didn't look at her right away. My eyes were fixed on the soldier's face. So young. Still pale, still fragile, but alive. And for a moment I felt lighter, like I had been carrying a weight on my shoulders for decades, and now it wasn't gone, but maybe I could finally set it down. But I shook my head gently and said, "No." Her eyes widened. "What do you mean?" It wasn't me," I said softly. "It was him. He fought. I just gave him a chance." There was a long silence. The rain outside had stopped. The air felt heavy and still, like the whole world was holding its breath with us. The nurse wiped her face. "I've never seen anything like that," she said quietly. "The way you worked, even with your hands shaking. It was like I was trying to save my own heart." I finished for her with a bitter smile. She blinked. "Yes," she whispered. I leaned back against the wall, exhausted. Every muscle in my body screamed, but inside something warm flickered to life. I thought about the little girl I lost so many years ago, and for the first time in decades, when I pictured her face, I didn't feel like I was drowning. "Call the on-call surgeon," I said, after a long pause. "Tell them he's stable, but he'll need a proper team to finish his care." The nurse nodded, already fumbling for her phone. I looked down at my blood-stained scrubs, my hands raw from the gloves, and whispered to myself, "You made it this time." The soldier's chest rose and fell in an easy rhythm, and deep down, I knew this wasn't just his second chance. It was mine too. The sun was rising. Golden light streamed through the narrow hospital windows, cutting across the tiled floor like thin blades. The storm from the night before had passed, leaving behind a damp stillness in the air. I stood in the hallway gripping the mop handle so tight, my knuckles had turned white. the faint scent of antiseptic mixed with the metallic tang of blood still lingering in my nose. My hands were shaking. Even after washing them 3 times, I swore I could still feel the warmth of his blood on my palms. I looked down at my reflection in the glossy floor. To anyone passing by, I was just a janitor again. No one would have guessed what had happened in operating room 3 hours earlier. No one would know how close I had come to walking away. How I had almost let another life slip through my fingers. The corridors were quiet now. Too quiet. The overnight staff had gone home. The day shift hadn't arrived yet. It felt like the whole hospital was holding its breath. The mop dragged across the floor with a soft squeak. I paused outside the soldiers' room. The nurse from the night shift was still there, sitting in a plastic chair, eyes half closed. She looked up when she noticed me. "He's stable," she whispered. "They've called in a trauma surgeon from the city. He'll be here in an hour." I nodded but said nothing. Part of me wanted to step inside and see him, to hear the beeping of the monitor again steady and strong. But my legs felt heavy, rooted to the spot, because I knew that if I saw his face, I'd remember another face, one much smaller, much paler, that I hadn't been able to save. My chest tightened. I gripped the mop handle harder and turned away. There were still floors to clean. That was my job. That was all I was supposed to do. As I pushed the mop bucket forward, the words of my father echoed in my head. "If nobody else will step up, you must." Last night I had stepped up, but I wasn't sure if that made me brave, or a fool still running from his ghosts. I heard a faint sound behind me. When I turned, the night shift doctor, the one who had collapsed hours earlier, was sitting upright in his bed. His face was pale, lips cracked, but his eyes were alert. He was watching me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead. "You stayed," he finally said, his voice hoarse. I froze. He swung his legs over the edge of the bed, wincing slightly. "You could have walked out, but you didn't." I felt my throat tighten. I didn't know what else to do, I murmured. He was dying. And no one else. The doctor cut me off with a sharp breath. "But you're not a doctor anymore. Are you?" The words hit harder than I expected. "No," I whispered. "I was. A long time ago." He studied me for what felt like an eternity. His gaze wasn't angry, but searching, like he was trying to see through me. "You've done something people train their whole lives to do, and you did it under pressure." I shook my head. "I didn't save him. He fought for his own life. I was just a pair of hands." The doctor didn't answer right away. He leaned back, the mattress creaking softly. "You know," he said the first time I lost a patient, "I nearly quit medicine." I looked up. He chuckled faintly. "It's a weight you don't forget. You carry it like a stone in your chest. But what you did last night..." He stopped, his eyes locking onto mine. "You carried that stone. And you walked anyway." I swallowed hard. "I wasn't brave," I said quietly. "I was terrified." "Good," he replied. "That means you still care." The room fell silent again. I thought of the young soldier, his shallow breaths, the flicker of his heartbeat on the monitor. I thought of the boy 25 years ago, the one I hadn't been able to save. His mother's scream still haunted me in my sleep. The doctor's voice broke through my thoughts. "What you did. It doesn't erase the past. But it might mean the past doesn't have to erase you." I stared at him. For the first time in years, I felt the stone in my chest shift just slightly. I looked down at my hands. They were still trembling slightly, though not from fear this time. The doctor's words echoed in my mind. What you did doesn't erase the past. But it might mean the past doesn't have to erase you. I didn't know what to say to that. So I stood there clutching the mop handle like it was the only thing anchoring me to the ground. You should be proud, the doctor said softly behind me. I gave a small, tired smile. I'm not a hero, I whispered. You don't have to be. I turned my eyes to the floor, watching the way the harsh hospital light pooled across the tiles. The streaks of dried blood had been cleaned hours ago, but in my mind I could still see them. I'm just a janitor, I said finally. The words came out steady, almost calm. The doctor didn't argue. He just nodded like he understood more than I was willing to say. I adjusted my grip on the mop and took a step toward the door. As I pushed it open, a rush of cool morning air filled the corridor. The smell of antiseptic clung to my clothes. At the far end of the hallway, I caught sight of the soldiers' room. The door was cracked open slightly. Inside I could hear the faint rhythm of the heart monitor, a soft, steady beep-beep that felt like music. I didn't walk closer. I couldn't. Instead, I stayed where I was, my hand resting on the doorframe. Maybe one day I would step inside and see him awake, see the life I helped hold on to. But not today. Today, I had floors to clean. The sound came so faintly I almost thought I imagined it. The thank you. I froze. Turning slowly, I saw his eyes flutter open. Pale, cloudy, but alive. He struggled to breathe, his chest rising and falling in shallow waves. His lips barely moved as he forced out the words. Thank you, doctor. The air left my lungs. Doctor. It felt like a cruel joke at first. Then a pang of guilt stabbed deep in my chest. I wasn't a doctor. Not anymore. Maybe never again. But I didn't correct him. The nurse leaned in, gripping his hand. You're awake. You made it, Noah. His lips curved into the faintest smile. His voice cracked like dry paper. Alive. Because of you. The nurse glanced at me over her shoulder. There was a softness in her eyes I hadn't seen before. No, I said quietly. It wasn't me. You fought. You didn't let go. Noah's eyes shifted slightly in my direction. His gaze was weak, but steady, and for a second I felt like he could see straight into me. Maybe he didn't know the truth. That I wasn't supposed to be the one saving him, that I wasn't qualified to hold a scalpel in my hand, let alone cut into flesh and stitch a life back together. But none of that mattered to him. To him, I was the person who didn't walk away. I didn't realize I was holding his hand until I felt the warmth of his fingers twitch against mine. His skin was cold, clammy, but the faint pulse beneath told me he was still here, still fighting. I squeezed gently, as if my grip alone could tether him to this world. And in that fragile silence, my father's voice echoed in my mind. Emily, you can't save everyone. But if there's even one person you can reach, don't turn your back. The memory hit me like a wave. I was 12 again, sitting at the kitchen table, watching my father pull off his work boots after another long shift at the mechanic shop. His hands were cracked, oil-stained, but his eyes were kind as he spoke. Sometimes you'll fail, and it'll hurt like hell. But that doesn't mean you stop trying. Back then, I didn't understand. Now I did. Noah's breathing was shallow but steady. The nurse adjusted his IV drip, whispering something soft I couldn't make out. I kept my hand wrapped around his. This wasn't about redemption for me anymore. This was about him. About giving this young soldier a chance to go home, to live the life he almost lost tonight. I swallowed hard, my throat tight. You're safe now. I whispered, unsure if he could hear me. "You held on, and you're going to make it." His eyelids fluttered but didn't open again, and maybe that was for the best. He didn't need to see my tears. As I stepped out of the ICU, the pale light of dawn spilled through the windows. The storm had passed, leaving the world outside eerily calm. My hands were still trembling, not from fear this time, but from release. I thought about Noah lying on that bed. I thought about the nurse's tearful thank you, and the doctor's bewildered stare when he'd woken earlier, but mostly, I thought about the part of me that had been trapped in that night, 25 years ago. For so long I believed I didn't deserve another chance, that I wasn't worthy of saving lives after my failure. But last night, something shifted. I hadn't just fought for Noah, I had fought for me. For the terrified young woman I used to be frozen in guilt. For the janitor who kept her head down scrubbing floors as penance. For the part of me that still wanted to believe I was capable of good. I paused in the empty hallway, gripping the mop handle like a lifeline. Through the glass doors, I saw a faint glimmer of sunrise on the horizon. And in that fragile stillness, I whispered to myself, "You did it. You stayed." I didn't know what would come next. Maybe the hospital administration would ask questions. Maybe there'd be consequences. But for the first time in decades, I didn't feel like running. Last night wasn't just about saving a soldier. It was about saving the broken woman I saw in the mirror every morning. And somehow, against all odds, we both survived. The letter shook in my hands as I read it one last time. "Dear Admissions Committee." I paused, staring at the blinking cursor on the screen. For years, I had convinced myself this day would never come, that I was too old, too broken, too far removed from the person I used to be. But after that night in the ER, after holding a life in my hands and refusing to let it slip away, I couldn't keep hiding behind a mop and bucket. That night didn't erase my failures. It didn't make me a doctor again. But it reminded me why I ever wanted to be one. It reminded me of the girl who stayed up late memorizing anatomy charts, who believed she could make a difference. Somewhere along the way, I lost her. Last night in that operating room, I found her again. I set the letter down and looked around my tiny apartment. The janitor's uniform still hung on the door hook, my textbooks dusty, but intact, sat in a box under the bed. I reached for my phone and scrolled to the nursing school's admissions page. Maybe they would laugh at a 30-year-old applicant with a checkered past. Maybe they'd say no. But I had faced worse odds, and this time, I wouldn't give up. The soft rustle of rain against the window reminded me of that stormy night, a night that had rewritten my story. I took a deep breath and hit send on the application email. The moment felt small, almost anticlimactic, but deep down, I knew nothing would ever be the same again. I sat alone in my small studio apartment, staring at the ceiling fans spinning lazily above me. The hum of the city outside the thin walls felt distant, like a world I wasn't quite part of yet. My fingers traced the edges of my admission confirmation email, glowing on the cracked screen of my phone. It wasn't acceptance, not yet. But it was a start. A tremor ran through my hand as I set the phone down. For a moment, doubt crept in like a cold draft. "What if you fail again?" a voice whispered in my head. "What if you ruin another life?" I pressed my palms together tightly, nails digging into my skin. The memory of the little boy from years ago flickered across my mind, his tiny hand limp in mine, the sound of a flatline echoing in my ears. I shook my head. No, I thought of Noah's faint breath in the hospital bed, his fragile voice as he tried to thank me. And I thought of my father's words echoing like a lighthouse through the fog. You can't save everyone, but you don't get to quit just because it's hard. I inhaled slowly, then let the air out in a shaky exhale. I can do it, I whispered to the empty room. The words felt strange on my tongue at first, too light, too hopeful. But I said them again louder this time. I can do it. The fan kept spinning above me. The city kept humming outside. But inside something shifted. It wasn't confidence, not yet. It was resolve. I stood and pulled the box of old medical books from under the bed. Dust clung to the covers, the pages yellowed with time. I placed one on the table and opened it carefully, like greeting an old friend. The words blurred for a moment as tears filled my eyes, not from sadness this time, but from something warmer. A quiet promise to myself and to everyone I would meet on the path ahead. The wind rustled gently outside my window, weaving through the branches of the oak tree by the street lamp. I sat still, listening to its whisper. It reminded me of the nights when I was younger, back when I believed the world was full of infinite chances and fresh starts. But I wasn't that girl anymore. I'd carried my failures like stones in my chest for years. And yet that night in the hospital when my hands trembled over Noah's open wound, when I swore I wouldn't run this time, something inside me cracked open. And through the cracks, light had begun to pour in. The room smelled faintly of old books and coffee, my laptop screen still aglow with the words of my application. For the first time in years, the fear didn't feel as heavy. I got up and opened the window. The cool night air brushed my face. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear faint laughter and music, life moving on. I closed my eyes. I could almost hear a voice soft, familiar, as if carried on the breeze. He ba jiao lai, my father's voice. Or maybe it was my own. Either way, I nodded. I wasn't trying to erase the past anymore. I was carrying it with me, not as a weight, but as a compass. I stepped back, closed the laptop, and let the wind fill the room. Tomorrow, I would return to the hospital. Not as a janitor, but as someone who remembered how to fight, as someone ready to try again. The oak tree swayed outside its leaves, whispering against each other like a quiet applause. Somewhere deep inside, I whispered back, I'm ready. And in that stillness, it felt like the night was answering me. A start, not an ending. Fade out,